À-bas-le-ciel.
This is a video about one of the most popular and I think emblematic forms of vegan activism in the year 2018, and it is again a harsh critique of that method of activism, partly in reply to a comment from Joey Carbstrong that I'm going to read out to you in just a second. Look, guys, it's really important to question the real meaning of the symbols we come to rely on in politics. Symbols do to some extent represent and misrepresent our goals, our aspirations, the meanings we're trying to convey in a political context. What does the silent protester wearing a mask mean to you? I think that the idea of a silent vigil is a powerful symbol in Western culture, but a silent vigil is a symbol of mourning. A silent vigil, for example, at the tomb of the unknown soldier. This is a standard expression of mourning, of loss, of death in our culture. And we have a pretty long history of doing silent vigils in vegan activism. The so-called Cube of Truth is one recent variation on this. However, a silent vigil doesn't express a positive aspiration to change the world. I think one of the reasons why the reaction to my earlier video criticizing the Cube of Truth phenomenon, one of the reasons why the reaction was so extreme was that I was challenging the symbolic value of standing silently in a mask. People wanted to think of this as something heroic, something defiant, something rebellious, and I was leading you to question that maybe instead this is something mindless, something conformist, something denigrating to the participants. And really it is. Let's talk about the mask itself for a moment. Let's question the symbolic value of the mask you're wearing. Do you know what the Guy Fawkes mask represents and what it means? It represents terrorism. And not just any kind of terrorism, Catholic fundamentalist terrorism. This alludes to the so-called gunpowder plot. I don't think anyone today regards that as a heroic plot to assassinate the King of England, to bring about a coup d'etat, to try to replace Protestantism with Catholicism as the ruling state religion of England. Now, Catholic terrorists in that period of time were much more of a real threat than Muslim terrorists, Islamic terrorists are a threat to the status quo of England today or any Western European culture. There's no real possibility of the government of England being swept aside and replaced with a Muslim fundamentalist government, whereas there was a very real threat that continued in England from Guy Fawkes through to the whole period of the English Civil War. There was a very real threat of the British government being swept aside, the parliamentary tradition and so on, and replaced with a Catholic monarchy, such as much of mainland Europe had at that time. It was a very real struggle, and very violent struggle. Now, I know there was a comic book called V for Vendetta. Many years ago, I read that comic book, and that comic book was adapted into a movie. I'm not going to comment on the movie, but I will say that the comic book itself used this symbol in an intelligent way to really question terrorism, and terrorism in the context of resisting a fascist regime similar to the Nazi regime of World War II. The comic book is not only about those issues. The comic book was also very interested actually in ethnic issues of black versus white, not the African-American experience, but actually about African immigrants, black people within the United Kingdom. There were a number of other themes that the comic book was interested in. But the comic book did not represent the Guy Fawkes mask as a simple heroic symbol. I think that's an incredibly stupid misinterpretation of a comic book that also represents its main character, the character wearing the Guy Fawkes mask. It very much represents him as insane. And of course, at the time that comic book came out, the resemblance between the Guy Fawkes mask and the villain, the well-known comic book villain who fights against Batman, the resemblance between it and the Joker was intentional, making you question right from the beginning, is this character the hero or the villain of the story. And politically, that's a question you're still supposed to be asking at the end of the story in that comic book. So, yes, I'm going to come out and say straight to your face, Joey Carbstrong, this is stupid. The symbol you're employing is stupid. It's bad and it's wrong and it's stupid, even on the level of interpreting what is this comic book supposed to be about? Historically, what is the Guy Fawkes mask supposed to be about? Or what is, vegan activism supposed to be? Yes, I'm going to say it that bluntly to you. Now, I'll mention by contrast is a very kind of reasonable and mealy-mouthed critique of this form of activism that was written by Tobias Leonhardt. I sent him some messages on Twitter saying, hey, I just noticed you did a criticism. You wrote a critique of the Cube of Truth. Here's my YouTube video where I much more harshly and directly criticize it. And you can kind of see in his replies, he's saying, yeah, well, I relate to what you're saying in that video, but he says he was intentionally being a bit more of a nice guy about it. He was being a bit more evasive in his criticism. Look, people, don't be a nice guy. Don't be evasive. Don't be dishonest. What is the point of engaging in political critique of what's going on in the movement if we're going to lie to ourselves or we're going to lie to others? I used to be a Buddhist. I used to be a member of a mainstream Theravada Buddhist religion. And I left because I don't want to be a part of a religion that's built on a lie. Not even seemingly harmless little lies about nirvana and meditation and charity and ecology and feeling good about yourself. Whether it's something within veganism or something in Western politics, I'm going to tell you the truth in as much as it's known to me. And a lot of the time, telling the truth comes down to being honest about what we don't know. About saying, hey, I'm going to tell you honestly, I don't know the answer to this question. It often comes down to being honest about the questions that we have to ask. But sure, here on YouTube, honesty is the only currency that we've got, and I am going to give it to you raw. If you haven't looked up the history of the Guy Fawkes mask and the gunpowder plot on Wikipedia, shame on you for standing in a public square and literally wearing a symbol of Catholic terrorism as your protest statement. What kind of ignorant shit is that? I don't even know if these people read the comic book V for Vendetta, but it doesn't symbolize the comic book. It symbolizes the gunpowder plot, the history of Catholic terrorism in Europe. But here's the other thing it symbolizes. It symbolizes your judgment on yourself as an activist. That there is no better change you can make in the world than to stand there silently like a mannequin. And it symbolizes a relationship of authority between you and the organizers of this protest. And that's what we're going to get into in this video. That's what's really sick, is that somebody's in charge, somebody's giving orders, and you are silently standing there and taking orders. And that authoritarian spirit, which is very much the opposite of what V for Vendetta was all about, this comic book and so on, that pervades and I think poisons the whole Anonymous for the Voiceless Cube of Truth project. That's what we're here to question. So Joey Carbstrong wrote to me saying, quote, cubes are held around once a fortnight for 4 hours. Fortnight is a fancy word for 2 weeks, by the way. So 4 hours of your time every 2 weeks. And we're now just going to pretend that that's nothing. That standing in silence with a mask, following orders from your overseer, from the organizers, that's nothing. I feel like I studied a lot of the philosophy of Aristotle in the last couple of days. Been reading Aristotle. I don't think it adds up to 4 hours. Maybe about 3 hours I put into this last couple of days. If I spent 4 hours lifting weights at the gym, that's a lot of time lifting weights at the gym, and sometimes that's what it takes. You're kidding yourself. There are only so many hours a week that you're awake, alert, not busy doing dishes, not busy with your job. You got 4 hours of mental clarity, and you're going to spend it standing in silence. That is a big sacrifice. And you have better things to do with your time, no matter who you are watching this video. You have better ways to advance the vegan movement, including even making YouTube videos like this one. I mean, this may be a really lousy form of activism, what I'm doing here. Writing a children's storybook may be a lousy form of activism, so there are other examples. But sure, it's better than standing in silence wearing a mask. So I continue. It's only 4 hours, so Giuseppe has another 13 days of the week to participate in some form of creative advocacy. Shame on you, Joey. No, he doesn't. You know what it's like to have a full-time job, Joey. You know what it's like you know what it's like to raise kids. I think Joey has a younger sister he's been involved in raising. Shame on you. What are you, joking? You think 4 hours? You think that's not a significant sacrifice? 4 hours every 2 weeks or even 4 hours a month? No, it's significant. And that's not what we're questioning here. The question is, could you be spending this time better? And you could. And you know you could, Joey. Now, I see what you do with your time. It ain't this. It ain't standing in silence with a mask on. It's not. He continues, AV has reached thousands of non-vegans with a powerful message. I wouldn't be so quick to dismiss this form of outreach. Well, I'm not just dismissing it, Joey. But tell me something. This excuse you make for Cube of Truth, it's reached thousands of vegans. Sorry, it's reached thousands of people with a powerful message. Isn't this the same excuse you made for Durian Rider? Like just a couple years ago, just 1 year ago maybe? Up until pretty recently, weren't you making this excuse for forms of vegan activism that you now regard as laughable, bad, and sad and wrong? You made this same excuse for Durian Rider and Freely. Other people make this same excuse for PETA, People for the Ethical Treatment of Animals, right? They reach thousands of non-vegans. So when does the excuse making stop? Right? And PETA does reach thousands of people, and Durian Rider does reach thousands of people. But what we're questioning here is this good or bad? Is this better or worse than other things you could do with 4 hours of your time? Right? At some point, somewhere, the excuse making has to stop. And I'm telling you, right here, right now, on this YouTube channel, is where the excuse making is going to stop. He says, I challenge you to participate in the Cube of Truth and then do a video reaction afterwards. Get on an outreach, have some conversations, document your experience, and get back to us. Look forward to hearing from you. Right, so you're going to hear in my reply here, I did volunteer. And now, in response to this discussion with Joey, I volunteered again. And both times, I was denied the right, I was denied the possibility of participating in a silent protest. Because that is how narrow-minded and authoritarian this organization is, or I could say in the plural, these organizations are. I reply, hi Joey, 4 hours is indeed a long time to stand silent in a mask, and you seem to be ignoring the possibility, quite real in my own experience, that the organizers are basically engaging in power-mongering, and that the experience is denigrating to the participant, who is not a celebrity like yourself. I did indeed volunteer to do Cube of Truth in Victoria, British Columbia, Canada, the city of Victoria. You may be unaware of this. And the organizers refused to let me to participate. There's a lot of power-mongering that goes on in local vegan movements. You may be blind to it, but if you don't totally conform to some little Hitler in the local movement, you're out. Excluded, hated, maybe even defamed on the internet. And that may be because you don't agree with the local little Hitler on some political issue unrelated to veganism. Many vegans I've spoken to around the world, most recently in France, have similar experiences, and not only with Anonymous or the Voiceless. Anyway, your challenge that I participate in a Cube is a bit surreal because I already volunteered for Cube and I was not allowed to participate, discussed here. So I did earlier videos on that, 2 videos I think. So there is a lesson to be drawn from my experience with Cube, and I think it's a lesson for you, old man. Smiley face, winky face, whatever, some kind of emoji. All right, so I already was excluded from Anonymous for the Voiceless, also known as Cube of Truth. I was kicked out of the Facebook group when I was volunteering to participate in the city of Victoria. Why did that happen? Absolutely no good reason. They had a post about Cube of Truth in Thailand. This is obviously a very brief summary. And I said I'd just gotten back from Thailand. And I said, look, I think you guys aren't thinking about the real political context in Thailand. In Thailand at that time, there was no legal right to protest. Thailand was at that time a military dictatorship. They had no elections. They had no freedom of speech. So I think there's a lot more going on here you guys need to think about. Totally constructive, interesting discussion to open up, and brief comment in a Facebook group. Banned. You're out. Oh, you think for yourself? Oh, you show some signs of independent thought? Then you can't be a member of Anonymous for the Voiceless. You can't wear the mask and stand there silently like a good little sheeple. We don't want you. We don't want people who ask questions. We don't want people who use their brains. And hey, guess what? Because of this conversation with Joey Carbstrong, I took a question to their chapter in Vancouver. So these are 2 different cities close to each other in Canada. I asked about volunteering for Anonymous for the Voiceless Cube of Truth in the city of Vancouver. Here we go. Quote, and I put the disclaimer up here. This is a question, not an answer. Hi, I've recently been discussing this question with vegan celebrity activist Joey Carbstrong and also semi-vegan reducitarian author and activist à-bas-le-ciel. What is the actual process, formal or informal, whereby people are included or excluded by AV? AV meaning Anonymous with the Voiceless, meaning Cube of Truth. My own opinion/experience is that people are excluded all the time for reasons that remain unstated. For example, someone in the group says that you're politically offensive, possibly for reasons unrelated to veganism. For example, someone says you voted for Donald Trump, and this raises the question of whether or not the outreach includes people who voted for Trump, etc. On the other hand, I've talked to one guy with experience doing cubes who said that he really made an effort to include people as participants who sounded like they were mentally deranged and who compulsively start lecturing about September 11th conspiracy theories, i.e. subjects unrelated to veganism and subjects that make the whole protest seem foolish or crazy. However, the basic question here is, does AV have a formal vetting process? And if the answer is no, are people reflecting on the informal vetting process that's ongoing as people are basically excluded all the time for reasons left unstated? What was their reply to this message? They kicked me out of the Facebook group. They prevented me from volunteering for Cube of Truth. Okay? What does standing silently in a mask symbolize for you? Maybe it symbolizes the Christian tradition of a silent vigil, the tomb of the unknown soldier, so on and so forth in Western Europe. Maybe for you it symbolizes an act of rebellion and defiance and a vague memory of a comic book and a movie called V for Vendetta. Maybe. I'm challenging you guys here, both symbolically and actually. What's going on here is top-down hierarchical power-mongering. It's the creation of little Hitlers. It's the creation of unquestioned and unquestioning obedience between the self-appointed leaders of this group and the followers who are willing to take that weight, who are willing to stand there and hold that screen and be a symbol of, a relationship of authority that I think should not even exist within the vegan movement. This is not a military organization, guys. And on the other hand, this is snuffing out, squandering, and wasting the real creative potential, the real intellectual potential of the people who are holding those signs, whether you're an architect or an artist or, an unemployed janitor. You have the mental potential to do something better with those 4 hours, whether you spend them actively trying to propound and advance the vegan movement or reading the philosophy of Aristotle or anything else. You are making a significant sacrifice, and I think you're making a sacrifice in order to be a symbol of something that is fundamentally bad and demented and wrong. Joey, if you still disagree, hit me up.
À-bas-le-ciel.